Thank you, everyone. Please take your seats and welcome back. We'd now like to welcome to the stage J.T. Batson, CEO and Secretary General of the U.S. Soccer Federation, Ed Foster-Simeon, President and CEO of the U.S. Soccer Foundation, Sola Winley, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Major League Soccer, and Ginny Ehrlich, Chief Revenue Officer at the U.S. Soccer Foundation.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back, and thank you so much for being here today. My name is Ginny Ehrlich, and I have the privilege of moderating our next panel. And we're going to talk about growing equitable access to the game. The next two panels are contiguous for a reason. During this first panel, we're going to be sharing data that organizations represented up here collaborated to collect on youth participation and talking about the systems challenges that stand in the way of equitable access to soccer across the United States. That was touched on during the first panel, so we're going to dive a little more deeply into the data and the statistics and the systems barriers. And then right after, we're going to be joined by people who are in the field every day working on solutions to talk about what the solutions are and how we can kind of spread and scale those solutions to really get to the vision that was set forth during the first panel between now and 2028. So welcome JT, Sola, and Ed. So great to be here. As I mentioned, I'm going to start by sharing some data points and having a conversation about those data points as a prompt. And the first data point is sobering, probably not stunning, but sobering. And that's about the disposition of young people who are already playing soccer. The study showed that 9 to 11-year-olds, nearly half of them say that they're going to stop playing soccer within the next year. A pretty sobering statistic if we think about it. Their main reason was fun. It was no longer fun. And if we dig a little deeper into the data, they talk about not feeling included and not feeling like they were a part of something, that belonging component. And that rung true more so for Black and Latino Hispanic youth who indicated this than their Caucasian peers. So that's the first kind of point of discussion. And JT, I know within the Federation you have a lot of member organizations really focused on the grassroots. And I'm curious in terms of if this has been a common theme you've heard from them and what you're hearing, what are some of the solutions that are being bandied about?
Sure. Well, thank you, and this is a really important discussion, and very glad to be here with you all on that. And Cindy sends her regards. I know I'm a stand-in. I wore cool shoes in her honor. One of the most sort of inspiring parts of my role is when we're able to go spend time with organizations who are out in the field, like some of the folks that we're hearing from next, who are, waking up every day trying to figure out how to make soccer more accessible, how to make it more inclusive, how to make it more fun. And I think, so we've got some colleagues in the room who, in our last internal all-staff meeting, our technical development department, which historically folks think of U.S. Soccer technical development as thinking about, how do you help our senior national teams win? How do you make it to where Danielle can sleep at night so that our women's team continues to be top in the world? Presented some experiments they're doing with soccer programs around the country around ensuring soccer is more fun at ages 4, 5, and 6. And the types of experimentation that they're doing is really quite innovative and very different from how people think about what U.S. soccer is thinking about. And so, as we embark on the next X years of growth of soccer in this country, how do we make sure that we're supporting membership and everyone who cares about soccer in this country to be able to make sure that soccer is more fun, soccer is more inclusive. And I know we'll talk about some of the structural things But I do think the fun part is something that we don't talk enough about. But I can let everyone in the room know, and my colleagues here can call me out if you want to test it on them around some efforts we're doing specifically around experimenting around how do we make sure the game is more fun so that kids do want to play and they're excited to continue to go on their soccer journey.
Thank you so much, JT. Sola, you can. I'd love for you to comment on the fun, and also Major League Soccer is working from the government level to the grassroots level. So I'm curious about kind of how this is showing up in your work around DE&I and around some of the other efforts happening with the league.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for getting us together for this discussion today. It's an important conversation. And so when we talk about systems change starts with the individuals who are part of that system talking about how you can change it, right? So this is a part of that process. I think that same body of research, Ginny, that you cited, if you did that research with any age group, right, I think that you would find that people who felt like something wasn't fun and that they didn't feel like they belonged wouldn't want to participate in that, right? And so to JT's point is we have to not only create more opportunities for access, but once kids and their families are exposed to the sport, we have to give them a reason to stay. And they're not going to stay if they don't feel like it's a place where they belong, and they're not going to stay if they don't feel like it's a place where they're having fun. I was fortunate enough to be part of a team in 1997 working for the NFL that started its flag football program. We went out into the field in Central Park. We went through different rules. How could we make this the most fun sport for kids to play? Right? You fast forward 25 years later, have the blessing of being able to coach my 12-year-old son in that NFL flag program. The same organization that runs that program is now going to be running MLS Go, right? The program that Joanne spoke about earlier, right? So in success, we are going to design something and create something that 25 years from now, maybe my son is playing with his son, right? Or somebody else's son is playing with their child. So soccer participation, there's no fast forward button that we can press to make it part of our cultural fabric. And I think that the next few years are certainly important. We have to take advantage of those. We have to make sure that we have an infrastructure in place where we continue to expose the sport. But for it to become part of who we are here as a nation, that's just going to take time, right? It's going to take time for it to cement. It's going to take time for it to develop some cultural resonance. For the first time, for example, I had a soccer ball in my house since I've started working for Major League Soccer, right? So I have a 2-year-old son, I have a 12-year-old son, and I have a 19-year-old son. My 19-year-old son, for the first time, showed an interest in soccer because of Messi. That's a good start. Not that his father worked at soccer, but it was because of Messi, which is
that's a reason not to be interested in soccer.
Which is fine. My 12-year-old, because I played football, I was interested in American football, took an interest in football, but is starting to also now move towards soccer. My baby boy, we put a soccer ball in the house, and for the first time what I realized why it's ubiquitous around the world is you don't have to teach it, right? You could just run around and kick the ball. You just run around and kick the ball. I'm not teaching fun. He's having fun. Right, so the earlier that we can expose kids to the sport, it doesn't really matter what your socioeconomic background is. Soccer is played all over the world. We'll talk about the pay-for-play system. But it's exposing kids at the earliest point so that they have that ball close to their feet, having a good time, having fun, and making sure, right, that their parents are engaged with them so that we get them out to continue on their soccer journey.
Thank you so much. Ed, clearly addressing these barriers is a primary focus of the work of the foundation. And curious about how this data sits with you and what, kind of what you see as some of the systems solutions for addressing the fun and belonging along with the access writ large.
Well, thanks for the question, Ginny. This whole idea of increasing access and opportunity is the whole reason the foundation exists. It is our core mission. It's what we're all about. And it's actually very sad when you think about soccer is like the gateway sport for almost every child. Almost every child starts playing soccer. And if they continued playing soccer, soccer would be the dominant sport in the United States. But something happens where you have this drop-off where children stop participating. Some of it, first of all, access, cost, all that, those are big parts. But some of it is cultural. So I had the pleasure early in my career to work as a volunteer for a youth club here in Virginia. I was the president of the club, 3,000 player club. And this was years ago, but already it had started this idea that, well, if you don't make the travel team, then why bother playing? Somehow it had morphed into, if you don't move up into elite play, then it's not worth playing. Rec is like, oh, you're just playing rec, right? Compare that to basketball, where kids play recreational every day. That's what they do, most kids are doing, is playing recreationally every day. But somehow our culture around soccer has developed around whether you're going to get a college scholarship or whether you're going to make the elite team. And so that puts a lot of pressure on young people. It puts a lot of young pressure from the time kids are 4. Parents are like pressuring like for success and getting to that next level. I think there's some structural things, but I think fundamentally we have some cultural problems around how we think about what it means to be a player, what it means to be a member of the soccer community. Soccer is this world game because it brings joy, it brings community, it brings people together, it improves health and well-being. It does all these wonderful things. But if you distill it down to, well, did we win the state championship? And if we didn't, it's not worth playing. If we didn't make the travel team, we should quit. That's sad, because children are missing out on the joy. The second piece is this idea at the foundation, we're focused on how do you create intentionally an environment where coaches know how to create a fun and safe environment, an environment where players feel a sense of belonging, right? Where you make the games and the interactions, appropriate for the children, for where they live, for who they are, and you make it a warm and inviting experience for those children. Those are the kinds of things that have to change over time, and Sola hit it right on the head. There's no button we're going to push that's going to if we just do this, it will be solved, right? But we have to start doing the work, and that work it should have started long ago, and it needs to continue for years to get where we want to be, because that half of kids, particularly children of color, are dropping out because they don't feel a sense of belonging, they're not having fun. How could that be? Really, how could that be?
Let's sit with that. That's what we can ponder as we continue. We've talked about youth in the sport who are leaving the sport, and now I'll share some data about the worst kept secret in sports in the United States, which is the pay-to-play model, and the challenges that creates. For this study, amongst kids who considered soccer, wanted to play soccer, nearly 1 in 5 didn't play because of price point. And that was particularly true for Latinx and Hispanic youth. So, this, as I mentioned, is kind of the worst kept secret in youth sports, right, in terms of the pay-to-play model. So I know everyone's working on it. And, I think the many buttons that need to be pushed will hopefully make a shift in this culture. Sola, I want to start with you. Through MLS Works, working with clubs, what are you finding successful at the local level in terms of being able to lower that price point and provide those opportunities for youth?
It's a good question. I think it's part of a solution that is going to take some time to really identify what's going to be sustainable here, right? In terms of, rather than it being sort of a one-off solution, right? Something that's sustainable. There's a quote, and I'm going to try to paraphrase it a bit, by Buckminster Fuller. He says to change the existing system, don't fight, right, the current reality. The current reality, right, is that there's a pay-for-play model. I don't believe that model is going to go away, right? But to change that system, right, create a new one to make it obsolete. And so the question is, what's the system that we're going to collectively be able to create and design to get those kids, we say under-resourced, but also underrepresented, right, to feel like there's a pathway and an opportunity, right, for them to participate and contribute, have fun, to growing the sport of soccer here in the country, right? And so soccer's played all over the world. It's played in some of the poorest corners and poorest ghettos all over the world. Some kids play in front of garbage dumps and in front of plastic recycling centers because that's the only place where they have to play, right? Which talks about infrastructure. And the foundation has done an exceptional job, leaders in this space, at creating infrastructure in places where people can play. You look at New York City, for example. This was probably 10 years ago, 550 basketball courts, right, where kids can just go play, pick up a basketball and go play. Less than 50 soccer pitches, right, where they can go play soccer. And so you're not going to get families and kids who don't have the resources to take trains and planes and cars to go play. They're going to have to be able to play and access it in the communities in which they live. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we continue to identify ways for us to collectively work together. We have to have much more infrastructure built in this country. And then when the infrastructure is there, we have to create opportunities for there to be some content on those. And I'm using that language intentionally, right? And that content, the foundation does a lot of tremendous work in that area already, right? The Just Ball League that you rolled out, if there's ways for us to look at how we could work together to continue to expand that. MLS Go is another opportunity there. You have price points that will be as low in some parts of the country, $100, right, for a child to be able to play over a 12-week season. That doesn't sound like a lot of money when you're looking at $2,000 or $3,000 to play. But for some families, that $100 price point is also out of reach, right? And so we have to continue to look for ways to extend our arm as far as it can go and as wide as it can go and the net as wide as it can go to capture as many people who want to play our sport as possible. And that's up to us, right? And there's no limitation other than resources, because it's not imagination, it's not ideas, right? It's really the resources. We have to be committed to dedicating those resources to giving back to others who give so much to us as a sport. We want people to subscribe to Season Pass on Apple. We want people to be able to come to our stadiums and root for their teams. In exchange, we have to also know what's our responsibility. If we're going to provide that service, if they're going to give us their time and attention, we also have a responsibility to give back to them.
Thank you. JT, building off of that, can you share a little bit about what membership organizations that you're working with are doing to really mitigate some of these cost barriers?
Well, one of the cool things about soccer in this country is sometimes it is not our friend in terms of the fragmentation, but in other instances it can be a benefit. And there's so much great experimentation going on, and actually met some people earlier today who are doing amazing things in communities here locally and around the country, focused on making sure soccer is more accessible. And I think one of the things that we're committing to doing as we move forward is how do we highlight those and how do we bring those things to light so that more people around the country can learn from each other, benefit from best practices, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and also we continue to get better and better as we do this. I'm glad you brought up the resources piece, because ultimately for us to accomplish the things that we want to go accomplish is going to require money, and lots of money. And one of the areas that we collectively haven't talked enough about is, one of the reasons why we need our professional leagues to be wildly successful is by virtue of those continuing to grow, we will have more money to invest back in our domestic soccer ecosystem in a way that will ensure that more kids have access to play, there are better coaches, there are better facilities, there are better infrastructure. And then we'd be remiss, given we're in DC, to not talk about the role that the federal, state, and local governments play in resources and access. And what are the things that we can do as an ecosystem to ensure that every school, whether elementary, middle, or high school, have soccer programs to ensure that every kid can walk, ride their bike, or take public transit to a safe place to play soccer. Those are the types of core fundamental things that we all need to lower our shoulder and push on. So I think a lot of great stuff going on. There are a lot of cool things, but there's to Ed and Shola's point, a lot more to do, and no silver bullets here.
So Ed, on this, in terms of systems level challenges, there are so many bright spots around the country, as both Shola and JT have alluded to. What are your thoughts in terms of how we create systems change around barrier to access based on cost? And what bright spots can we lift up that might be able to, be scaled from a systems perspective?
Well, program design, how you deliver the programs and leveraging existing resources, partnering with non-traditional groups. We, at the U.S. Soccer Foundation, the children we serve, 90% of them are on free and reduced school lunch. So that's a true indicator of poverty. We throw around the word poverty a lot, and I was always struck by the definition, which the federal definition is a family of 4 living on $25,000 a year. Let that sink in for a minute. A family of 4 living on $25,000 a year. A low-income family is a family of 4 on double that, on $50,000 a year. So that does not leave a lot of discretionary dollars for a large segment of society, not just those in poverty, but low-income households as well. So our work has been designed around leveraging existing resources in the community-based organizations that are already serving children, and then providing them with the curriculum and the training that they need to be able to deliver quality soccer programming, designing that programming for it to be fun and entertaining and engaging around small-sided games. But the pay-to-play model, someone has to pay, right? Right. There are costs for equipment, there are costs for facilities, there are costs that are associated with that. And the interesting point, though, is if we think about soccer differently, there are resources available in existing systems to support the game. So when we talk about soccer in terms of who won the state championship or who won the league, that's one conversation. But when you talk about engaging in sport and engaging in soccer as a tool to improve the health and well-being of children, then that's a different conversation. That's a conversation that government cares about, improving the health and well-being of children. The mental health crisis around young people during the pandemic, it exposed just how young people are struggling, and it also revealed that not having access to sport fueled that struggle, because they find community, they find a place of belonging, a place to play, to have fun with their friends. So if we think about our sport, we all love the game because it's incredible. Who wasn't thrilled watching, whether you were a fan or not, watching the final of the World Cup, the last Men's World Cup? It was incredible. However, the value of the game extends beyond what happens in the stadium. It's a way to build community. We have, it brings people together from different cultures, different backgrounds. It's a universal language. And when you think about our sport in the broader terms, right, then there's a way to connect it to resources that we would not traditionally have access to. And that's how the foundation thinks about it. We think about, okay, we want kids playing soccer, but what is the value of their participation? Does it improve their health and well-being? Yes, we've been able to show, if you design a program, effectively, that 81% of the kids will have improved health outcomes. This matters. This matters to a wide range of people who will support these kinds of programming. But if we're only talking about who's going to get a trophy, then that's less interesting to a broader set of society. But when you talk about the health and well-being of children and how do you improve that, then there's a vast network of support to get behind that.
to combine this conversation with our prior one and some of the things we were teasing. So one of the things that I am comfortable sort of sharing are we went through a big strategic review, and many of you in the room, thank you for participating in that. As a part of that, we have come up with some operating philosophies for U.S. soccer. And the first two, we won't go through all of them. The first two, one was all soccer is soccer, and two is that we believe in pathways, not pyramids. And we think it's important for U.S. soccer, which is historically associated with very formal forms of soccer and wonderful forms of soccer, needs to formally embrace that all soccer is soccer, and that it's really around how do you create lifelong pathways for participation in whatever form that is for you, and whoever you are, and whatever ability you have to participate in the game. Those are the things that we all need to be focused on in the soccer ecosystem. And so yeah, very, very much resonates with who we want to be as an organization, but who we want to be as an ecosystem. And we're certainly excited to partner with all of you to bring that to life.
I love what you just said. I think that strategically, it's very important, right? Because the pyramid, sort of represents that there's a top, right? That one is getting to. A pathway is a journey. You don't even know if there's an end to that destination. Yep. I was one of those poor kids, right? That would have been part of that data set, right? A family in poverty, growing up in food stamps, and sports was one of the things that was a lifesaver, right? In a host of different areas, right? That sense of belonging, that sense of feeling like you can accomplish something, you can compete. And when I was on the field, it wasn't a matter of maybe not having enough to eat at home, right? It was a matter of being with your friends and having a good time. And so when you have kids who grow up in an environment where they might not have had access to understand what's happening outside of their direct environment, how does that kid feel like he or she is going to belong when they go into a completely different environment, right? If he or she is a great athlete, right? Maybe they're going to be picked to play on a travel team. But that doesn't mean that they're going to have a good time and they're going to have fun, right? Because it's not an environment that's going to be culturally receptive, right, to understanding the background that they came from, right? So part of that, there's an education process. Major League Soccer, and Joanne talked about this a little earlier, how we building our plans based on research. We did a big research study recently with our fans, and two things rose to the top. Mental health, right? We asked two questions. What's important to you? What's impacting you most in your life right now? And where do you think that there's some resonance for what Major League Soccer should also be engaged in? And there was some variation by our club markets, but overall, mental health rose to the top, and youth sports access, those two things. And there are opportunities for us to, and we will be doing that intentionally, right, to continue to increase access, but doing it in a way that takes the entire person into consideration, their well-being, right? And it's an opportunity where it's not just about playing the game, right, but about creating an opportunity to create stronger communities, healthier people, healthier human beings. In this on this very stage, right, there was a celebration not too long ago of the life of Kevin Payne, right? And he had a very simple mantra, right, which was to win championships and serve the community. We're in the business of service, right? And the more that we realize that we are servant leaders and agents of service, the more that we approach the spirit of what we have to do from a place of compassion, right, from a place of empathy, and from a place of understanding, right? That it's not just about the business of sport, but sport for good, right? The goodness that can come from our game.
Can I just build on what Sola said? This idea of there are a lot of clubs that are scholarshiping players, like who can't afford to participate. That's part of the culture of soccer, but only a fraction of kids will benefit from that. And that idea of moving children, bringing the children to the game, needs to be reversed. It's how do we bring the game to where the children are and make it accessible at the neighborhood level where kids can play in their community. If there's not a safe place to play within a half mile of where a kid lives, he's probably not going to play because they can't get there, right? So how do we make sure that programming is at the schoolyard, in the neighborhood park, at the neighborhood community center, that that the games and activities are being played in the community where children live, because that's the simplest way to eliminate the barrier. We talk about the cost, transportation, just getting. I mean, look, I have 4 kids. They all played soccer. I don't know how many miles I logged, driving state to state to play a game, right? A lot of people can't do that. They don't have the ability to do that. So this idea of
Just practice.
right, that's just practice, right? Just to get to practice, right? But how do we bring the game to communities and make it easier for all children to participate? And yes, my focus is on underserved communities, but that should be true for all children. Yes. The game should be easy to play and not a challenge for a family to allow their children to participate.
And that's an excellent segue to my next statistic, so thank you for that. And that is that the study found that 25% of youth don't play soccer who want to play soccer because it wasn't available in their neighborhoods where they live or in their schools. And let's juxtapose that to basketball. Basketball is played for free at a 3 times more higher rate across the United States. And it's because of the investment that the NBA has historically put into making sure there are basketball courts, and that's been for decades. And so, how do we get there? What from a systemic perspective can we learn from the success of basketball and scale across the U.S.?
You're singing my song right
I know.
there. So for those in the audience, I'm not as a kid, I did not play soccer. I grew up in Brooklyn. Soccer wasn't even a thing in my neighborhood, but basketball was, right? And so there was always a basketball court. Any school, any park, anywhere that we went, there was a basketball court easily that we could access, and we played a ton. So our approach at the foundation has been to, can we replicate that by building mini pitches? We call them mini pitches, small, courts in neighborhoods, in the schoolyard, at the park, so that kids have easy access to participate. Because not only does it give them access, but it gives them access on their terms, right? If the only time I ever played basketball is when I showed up for the official team and a coach and all that, basketball wouldn't have as big a part in my life growing up. We need to make it so that children not only get to play organized soccer easily, but that they have the opportunity to play with their friends on their own, right? Without adults, without anybody around to tell them what to do and where they should be on the field and, how they should kick the ball, that they have the opportunity to play freely. And that, when we talk about joy, and having fun, that's where joy comes from. From having that freedom to be able to express yourself with your friends and to play. So creating these places to play at the neighborhood level, you want to have organized programs around those places to activate them, to ensure they're being utilized. But you're also creating a different culture for our game by making it easier for anyone of any age to go out and play and have fun and just be with their friends.
Even before, and I think professional sports leagues certainly have a role to play, an important role. But I want this notion of cultural resonance, right? That before there were basketball courts everywhere, in those milk crates, right, where the bottom of it was cut out, that we would shoot basketballs into that, right? And we would find ways to play the sport of basketball however we could, right? And that same ingenuity of playing the sport of soccer takes place around the world, right? We've created here a system where there's a certain model in which one participates, right? So what Ed is talking about really resonates, right, is pick-up soccer, right, where it doesn't require there to be an organization of teams and an organization of coaches, where kids just want to go out and play and have a good time, right? And so the more that we can create soccer as an aspirational opportunity here, right? It's just not yet ingrained into many parts of the American psyche yet, right? Messi is going to help with that, because Messi is going to bring much more awareness to the sport, right? That awareness then allows us to capture people's attention, right? Once we have their attention, then we can start to mobilize more accessibility and more action. But it starts with awareness and attention. It's such a competitive space just for people's time, right? They have all the sports that they could play. They have video games that they could play, which we haven't touched on yet, which is a very important gateway, right? That my 12-year-old son the other day, now all of a sudden he loves baseball. Never want to talk. He loves baseball because he played a baseball video game with his older brother and understood it a little bit more, right? And now he wants to go play baseball next year, right? So kids right now, they're spending a lot of time in front of that screen, unfortunately. But that's a place where they are. So when we talk about, going to where kids are, bringing the game to them, we have to continue to find ways to expose them to the sport where they're at, right? Which means that if they're on their computer, if they're watching YouTube, if they're playing video games, then soccer has to become much more prevalent there so that it becomes much more part of their awareness. We can get their attention. They say, you know what, that's pretty cool. Let me go check that out. I want to go play that. So it's an exciting time for soccer. I mean, think about it. We've talked, the first panel talked about it. The next few years here, what this opportunity is, the energy that's going to be in this nation, the focus that's going to be on soccer here in this country, and actually in North America, Canada, Mexico as well. It's unparalleled. And it's an excellent opportunity for us to continue to create more awareness and exposure for the sport. And I think that 25 years from now, and I use that number intentionally, 25 years from now, I think the conversation is going to be materially different. And soccer is going to be in a materially different place in this nation.
It's interesting that I'm thinking as this conversation is going on, when we talk about access for under-resourced communities, it can feel like, well, that's kind of like not really attached to the whole soccer ecosystem, that's a charitable thing to do. But if you think about how the game evolves around the world, it will be good for the game at every level. If you can create an environment where kids are playing and having fun, on their own energy and on their own momentum in communities, that will change the game at every level.
Without question. I think one of the things that, often we'll hear is, the size of our country is one of our challenges. Well, I think the size of our country is one of our strengths. We got 330 million people. And so how do we're the richest country in the world. We got a whole bunch of people. So if we can get more people playing soccer and in their communities in a way that they love, to where we're growing participation at all levels, we will have more great players and we will win more things. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, because while we do care about more children having positive health benefits and having better leadership development skills and feeling more included and having soccer being something that's fun, absolutely. But also, if we want to keep winning things, and if we obviously on the men's side we want to go win things, a big part of that strategy has got to be, how do we get everybody in this country playing? And so whether you care about it because you want to win World Cups or because you care a whole lot about the opportunities for more kids having positive experiences, whatever your flavor, there are real reasons why this has got to be a top priority. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's central to our the same hotel y'all are staying at. The Marriott in Georgetown that's not in Georgetown. When right after I joined, Ernie Stewart, who was our sporting director at the time, one of our all-time great players, we intentionally stayed there for the NWSL final so we could be by ourselves and have a long strategy session. And I thought, sporting director in charge of our national team programs, all he'd want to talk about are very specific things around our senior national teams. All he wanted to talk about was participation, because he was convinced that if we got everybody playing in this country over a period of time, 25 years, that we will win, and we will win consistently because of our scale and because of our resources and because of the diversity in this country. And so if we could harness that and turn that into a competitive advantage, we're going to win.
And if I can just, we've talked about under-resourced, and I talked about it a little earlier in terms of underrepresented, right? So when we talk about inclusivity, right, it's not just for those under-resourced communities, but also for those communities that are under assault, right, which right now is the LGBTQ community, right, where access is being cut off, right? And so every professional sports league has a youth recreation program, right? And the majority of them are run by the same company that runs ours out of Florida, RCX, right? So what can we do as a league, right? Leagues tend not to lean in on policy issues. That's not our strength. But we can lean in on participation, right? So there's opportunities for all of the leagues to come forward, right? To think about how we create the most inclusive environments possible. So what could we do, and what have we done in Major League Soccer, right? So if you look at our the player pathway, right? So we had MLS Next. We have transgender inclusive policies there. We just rolled out MLS Go starting in the fall. We have transgender inclusive policies there, right? And so if we have a saying soccer for all, well, what does that mean, right? It means that we've had it as a diversity initiative, but it's a participation strategy also, right? That for soccer for all means all, right? If you want to play soccer, you have an opportunity, whether it's in an MLS Go branded jersey for one of your favorite MLS teams, or whether it's part of Just Ball. There's a lot that we can do as an ecosystem to continue to create access and opportunities for everyone to feel like they belong.
Can I build on that? Because I think what you just said is really important. And one element of that can't be overlooked is the requirement that coaches get trained in a different way to be able to understand how to create a safe space, how to create a sense of belonging for players. Children come from many different backgrounds, from many different experiences in their life. Some are experiencing adverse childhood experiences that you and I don't even want to think about, right? Others are dealing with their identity issues. But how does a coach, is he prepared or is she prepared and trained to be able to understand how to create a space that is inclusive and creates a sense of belonging for players?
Well, picking up on that, obviously we've got a panel later today on participant safety. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really inspired me in some of my first conversations with Mana and Danielle and some of, I can't see everyone in the audience who's here right now who have really been leading on this, is taking a very expansive view of what safety means. And some of the discussions we've had around how do we normalize the culture of these positive environments and positive experiences, I think is a really important discussion for us to all have. And then as U.S. Soccer, as we think about coaching education, how do we massively broaden the definition of what coaching education means? It's more than just licenses. It's how do we ensure, and also who's a coach, right? So it's sort of a, it's families, it's friends, it's of course the formal coaches that you have, and obviously coaching licensing is important, but our how we think about the role we play there and ensuring that there are the best environments for play is very fundamental to our future and something that we're all really excited to work on.
It's funny, and it's not funny. It's interesting to me. We've trained quite a few coaches focused specifically on under-resourced communities, and the training includes things that are not about X's and O's and tactics, and there's some of that. But what it really is talking about is this belonging and their role as a coach and as a mentor to young people, that they play this additional role. Youth coaches are among the most influential people in a child's life. And we don't provide enough training and understanding of that responsibility, right? That coaches think, oh, I'm a good coach if I won the league or I won, the title or whatever. Educating coaches that their broader value is in their role as a mentor in helping to develop these young people and to develop the character and the life skills for these young people as they grow up. Because less than 1% of kids are gonna, in playing any sport, not just soccer, less than 1% are ever gonna get paid to be a professional athlete, right? So what's the payoff for everybody else? What is the payoff? The payoff is all these learnings and this opportunity to engage in a sport you love, develop a passion for it, have a sense of belonging. Almost every time we talk to a child in our program about what they like about being there, is that it's like a haven for them to participate. It is like a safe space. They're not thinking about anything else that's going on around them. They are enjoying this solitude of play with their friends. You know, this is incredibly important, and we have to think about not just the access and the opportunity, but preparing coaches to create broader access.
Thank you. You know, we've talked about what detracts kids from the game. We've talked about what keeps kids out of the game. We've talked about challenges. So I just want to end on a glimmer of hope. So if you all, to shepherd our panel of grassroots solutions in, could share kind of one or two glimmers of hope you have for the future in terms of addressing some of these systems challenges.
So one of the areas as we think about, and we often talk about accessibility and inclusivity, that we don't talk about is that U.S. soccer and the U.S. soccer community are world leaders as it relates to disability soccer. We have more national teams than anyone else in the world. And there are a growing number of members of U.S. soccer focused on this, and it's something that, a fun thing for me was, unbeknownst to me, the club I grew up playing for had reached out to U.S. soccer because they want to launch programs to ensure that soccer is accessible to everyone in the community in Augusta, and it sort of got, forwarded on to me and said, hey, this is really cool, and it's sort of like, wow, how do we do this more broadly, and how do we ensure that when we think about accessibility and inclusivity, we have the most expansive definition of what that looks like, so it really is soccer for all. And so we are world leaders in some of these areas, and so we should celebrate that and champion that and aggressively lean into it. So yeah, lots of cool stories we can tell, and lots of good stuff. But that's one very positive thing that I want to make sure we all highlight and celebrate.
What gives me hope? There continues to be more and more representation, right? If the Danielle Slayton's on television and owning a soccer team, more and more intentionality around the diversification and inclusivity at the league office. And representation matters, right? And particularly if we're talking about kids and what kids look up to, right? They look up to stars in this country. And so the more we can continue to be intentional about representation and inclusivity, right? Not just because of somebody's skin color, but because of the different backgrounds and life experiences that they have, right? We just bring a different sensibility to discussions. The research is very clear. The more inclusive a group is, the more ideas and innovation it will generate. And this is a time for innovation, which means that it requires us to have as many diverse and inclusive voices, different backgrounds, different socioeconomics, different sensibilities, to building the sport in the way that we want. And if you look at where the country is, you could say that there's not much to be hopeful for, right? But what gives me hope is really the power of the human spirit. And there's always an energy that continues to draw us closer towards one another. We are communal beings, and I'll always put my faith in the power of the human spirit.
Yeah, there's a lot to be hopeful about, and I say that sincerely because conversations that we're having now with the organizations represented in this room, on this panel, these conversations were not happening in the not too distant past, right? This idea of thinking about soccer differently, thinking about participation and expanding it and broadening it. I think that the future is bright. It gives me hope that we talked about this in the first panel. The next 5 years is it's like a once in a generation opportunity here, that we have these things that we want to do, but now we have the fuel of, major soccer events coming to this country that will capture the imagination, not just of existing soccer fans, but folks who are not even familiar with the game, Just as in '94, there was an explosion of growth of participation. There will be another explosion of growth in participation or coming after the 2026 World Cup. So I'm very hopeful about the future, but particularly that the leagues and U.S. soccer and all the major players are thinking about participation now in a much broader way and thinking about how do we increase access and expand the tent so that we have more people participating in this game.
Thank you. I hope all of you enjoyed listening to our panelists, JT, Sola, and Ed, as much as I did. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.